Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Peoria's First Baptist Church, casting shades of blue and gold across the wooden pews. It was 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning in early October 2024, and the hall was almost full. 230 parishioners in their Sunday best filled the pews, their faces expressing the usual reverence before the start of the service. Reverend Chase Sanders stood at the pulpit, his figure radiating confidence and calm. At 44, he looked exactly as a pastor of a respected congregation should: neatly trimmed hair with graying temples, a strict dark blue suit, a snow-white shirt, and a burgundy tie. His voice was deep and persuasive, each word spoken with the measured intonation of a man accustomed to being heard. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his gaze slowly sweeping across the rows, pausing on familiar faces. "Today I want to talk to you about truth, about the truth that sets us free and the lies that enslave our souls." His wife, Jessica, sat in the front row on the right, the traditional place for the pastor's family. She was 42 years old and the embodiment of a devoted pastor's wife. An elegant pastel dress, a pearl necklace, her light hair pulled back into a neat bun. Next to her were their children, 16-year-old Emily and 14-year-old Jacob, both dressed in their Sunday best, both with the slight boredom on their faces typical of teenagers at church. In the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 32, Jesus says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Chase continued, his hand resting on the open Bible in front of him. But what happens when we live a lie? When we hide our true intentions, our true actions from God and from our neighbors? The congregation listened intently. Many nodded. Some took notes in their notebooks. Chase Sanders was a beloved pastor for a reason. In his 8 years of service at this church, the congregation had nearly doubled in size. His sermons were clear, applicable to everyday life, free of excessive moralizing, yet firm on matters of faith and morality. "Lies destroy families." His voice grew firmer. "Lies destroy marriages. Lies distance us from the Lord. And the most dangerous thing is when we start lying to ourselves, when we convince ourselves that our sins are not so terrible, that we can live a double life without consequences." After the service, as usual, Chase stood at the exit, shaking hands with parishioners, exchanging pleasantries, listening to requests for prayers and blessings. Jessica was nearby, her smile warm and sincere as she invited elderly ladies to the women's club meeting next Thursday. "A beautiful sermon, Reverend," said Mrs. Wilson, an 80-year-old widow who had been attending services regularly for 60 years. "You always know how to touch our hearts." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. The Lord guides my words," Chase replied with a warm smile. The perfect picture, the perfect family, the perfect pastor. That same morning, in another part of Peoria, Matthew Coleman sat at the kitchen table in his small apartment on the second floor of an old house on Main Street. In front of him stood a cup of cold coffee and an open laptop with an unfinished lesson plan on Civil War history. He was 39 years old and looked younger than his age. Athletic build, dark hair, serious face with fine features. He wore thin-rimmed glasses and preferred simple clothes, jeans, plaid shirts, sweaters. Nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention. Matthew had been teaching history at Peoria High School for the past 7 years. He was a good teacher, his students respected him, his colleagues valued his professionalism, but no one could say they really knew him. He was always polite but distant. He came to work, taught his classes, attended mandatory meetings, but almost never joined in informal gatherings after work. 5 years ago, he got divorced. The marriage lasted only 3 years, and no one really knew the reason for the breakup. Matthew didn't talk about it, and his ex-wife left Peoria immediately after the divorce. Since then, he had lived alone, and it seemed to suit him just fine. But those who looked closely could see that something had changed in recent months. Matthew had become pensive and distracted. Sometimes he would stare out the window during his break, a look of deep sadness on his face. After lunch on Monday, Chase stopped by the grocery store on Union Avenue. He needed to buy milk and bread, a simple errand from Jessica. He was pushing the cart down the aisle when he saw him. Matthew was standing near the cereal aisle, studying a box of oatmeal. Their eyes met for a second, no more. Matthew nodded slightly. Chase didn't react, but his fingers tightened around the handle of the cart. They passed each other. To an outside observer, it was a chance encounter between two strangers in a supermarket. But the tension that hung in the air for those few seconds suggested otherwise. 20 minutes later, Chase was sitting in his car in the parking lot, holding his phone in his hand. The screen displayed a short message. "Tonight? 8?" He glanced at his watch. It was 3 in the afternoon. Then he typed his reply. "Yes." The apartment was on the outskirts of town, in an unremarkable 3-story building built in the 70s. The first floor was occupied by a self-service laundromat. The second and third floors were residential. Apartment number 7 on the second floor was tiny, just one room, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. The furniture was minimalist: a sofa bed, a table, 2 chairs, an old TV. Chase parked his car 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the way. It was already dark, and the streets were deserted. He climbed the creaky stairs and knocked on the door in the agreed manner. 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Matthew opened the door almost immediately. They didn't hug or kiss, not right away. First, Chase came in, closed the door, and took off his coat. Only then, when they were safe behind closed doors, in a room with the curtains drawn, did they allow themselves to relax. "How was the service?" Matthew asked quietly, pouring water into the kettle. "Same as always," Chase replied, sinking onto the sofa. He looked tired. A sermon about truth and lies. Matthew turned, his eyes meeting Chase's. Something painful flashed in his gaze, but he said nothing, only nodded and returned to the kettle. They had been renting this apartment for 2 years. Cash payments, a contract under a fictitious name. They met once a week, sometimes twice. There was nothing personal here, no photos, no belongings that could give them away. Just a refuge, just a place where they could be themselves for a few hours. But even here, within the safety of these 4 walls, the tension never went away. On Friday, during lunch break in the staff room, Elizabeth Chen watched Matthew. She was 33 years old, taught English, and considered Matthew the only person at school with whom she could truly talk about literature, history, life. She had noticed changes in him over the past few weeks. Matthew had always been reserved, but now he seemed distant. He sat by the window, his lunch untouched in front of him, staring into the distance. His hands were clenched into fists. "Matthew," she called softly, moving closer. "Are you okay?" He flinched, as if awakening from a trance, and turned to her. He tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, of course, just tired." "You've been saying that for a month." Liz leaned closer, lowering her voice. "What's going on? Maybe you want to talk?" Matthew looked at her for a long moment, and for a second, it seemed like he was really going to say something important. But then he shook his head. "Thanks, Liz. But I'm really fine. Just a lot of work." She didn't believe a word of it. 2 weeks had passed since that Sunday. The October days were getting shorter, the temperature was dropping, and the trees along the streets of Peoria were turning shades of red and gold. It was fall break at the schools, a week of rest before the final push to the winter holidays. Matthew Coleman sat in a coffee shop on the corner of Adams Street and Jefferson Avenue, a small place with worn wooden tables and the smell of freshly ground coffee. It was 3 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, and the coffee shop was almost empty. Just an elderly couple by the window and a student with a laptop in the corner. Liz arrived right on time. She ordered a latte and sat down across from Matthew, immediately noticing the dark circles under his eyes. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. They were close enough friends to speak directly. Matthew tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Thanks for being honest." "Matthew," Liz leaned across the table, lowering her voice. I know you say everything is fine, but that's obviously a lie. I'm your friend. For the past few months, you've been disappearing before our eyes. What's going on? He stared into his cup of black coffee for a long time, then looked up at her. There was so much pain in his eyes that Liz felt her heart tighten. I'm tired, Liz, he said quietly. Tired like I've never been tired before. I'm 39 years old, and I'm still hiding. I'm still living as if I'm doing something criminal. Liz remained silent, giving him time to collect his thoughts. She guessed what he was going to say, but waited for him to say the words himself. After the divorce, I thought it was over, that I would never lie or pretend again. But then, he paused, clenching his hands into fists. Then I met someone, and everything became even more complicated because this person can't be with me openly. He has his own life, his own family, his own reputation. He's married, Liz said. It was a statement, not a question. Matthew nodded. Yes, and influential, and religious, very religious. He calls what we have a sin, even when we're together, even when he... Matthew's voice broke. He still considers it a sin. Liz reached out and covered his hand with hers. Matthew, it's not a sin. Love is never a sin. He doesn't see it that way. Matthew smiled bitterly. For him, it's a temptation, something he has to fight, something he has to get rid of through prayer and willpower. And he looked away. And I just want to live. Just live honestly. Not hide. Not meet in a secret apartment once a week and pretend that's enough. How long has this been going on? 2 years. 2 years of secrecy, lies, fear. I can't do this anymore, Liz. I really can't. I'm 39. When will it end? When will I finally be able to just be myself? A young couple entered the coffee shop, laughing loudly. They walked to the counter, and Matthew fell silent until they were far enough away. What are you going to do? Liz asked. I've made my decision. Matthew straightened up, and his voice took on a tone of determination. I'm leaving. I'll hand in my resignation at the end of the semester. I'll leave Peoria, maybe California or New York. Somewhere I can live openly and not be afraid of judgment. What about him? Matthew paused. I'll give him a choice. Either we stop hiding together or it's over. I can't be his secret anymore. That same Friday evening, in apartment number 7, the conversation was repeated, but with a completely different outcome. Chase stood by the window, his back tense, his hands clenched into fists. Matthew sat on the sofa, and a heavy silence hung between them after the words that had just been spoken. You can't do this. Chase's voice was low, dangerous. Do you understand what you're doing? What you're going to destroy? I'm going to destroy? Matthew stood up. Chase, you're the one who can't live honestly. You're the one who preaches about truth every Sunday, and then you come here and call us sinful. Because it is sinful. Chase turned away, his face contorted with pain and anger. It's sinful before God, before my family, before my community. I pray every night to be free of this temptation, but I am weak. I am sinful. You're not weak, you're just human. Matthew took a step toward him. You love me. That's not a sin. It is a sin, Chase repeated, but his voice trembled. And I must fight it. I must be stronger. Fight me? Your feelings? Matthew shook his head. I won't be your sin anymore, the one you're trying to get rid of. I won't wait around for you to decide that your reputation is more important than me. It's not about my reputation. Chase raised his voice. It's about my faith. It's about my children. It's about Jessica, who has devoted 18 years of her life to me. Do you want me to destroy all that? I want you to be honest. Matthew ran a weary hand over his face. At least with yourself. You don't love Jessica, not the way a husband should love his wife. You're using her as a cover. The blow came unexpectedly, not physical, but verbal, and it hit its mark. Chase paled. Get out, he whispered. Get out now. Matthew grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, but stopped at the threshold. You have time to think, Chase. I'm handing in my resignation in 2 weeks. I'm leaving Peoria at the end of December. You can come with me. We'll start a new life together. Or you can stay here and continue lying to yourself and everyone around you. It's your choice. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Chase was left alone in the apartment. He sank down on the sofa, wrapped his arms around his head, and allowed himself to cry for the first time in many years. On Saturday morning, Jessica Sanders was cleaning the bedroom. It was her weekly routine: laundry, cleaning, preparing for the new week. Chase was in his office at the church, preparing his Sunday sermon, and the children were at their friend's house. She was changing the bed sheets when she heard a soft vibration. It wasn't coming from her phone. That was downstairs in the kitchen. Jessica listened. The sound repeated. It was coming from Chase's jacket pocket, hanging in the closet. She knew she shouldn't check. She knew it was an invasion of privacy. But something compelled her to walk over to the closet and take the phone out of the pocket. It wasn't his usual phone. It was a simple prepaid model, cheap and nondescript. The screen showed a notification of a message from a contact saved simply as M. Jessica's hands trembled as she opened the message. The phone wasn't password protected. Think about what I said, please. She scrolled through the conversation. Most of the messages had been deleted, but a few remained. Can't today. Jessica will be home. I miss you. This isn't right. We shouldn't. But I'm coming anyway. Jessica slowly sank to the edge of the bed, the phone still in her hand. One word echoed in her head. M. Who was M? Or was it an M? She recalled the last few months. Chase had become distant. He said he was tired of his church duties. He often went out in the evening to visit sick parishioners or prepare documents in the office. Sometimes he would come back late, smelling of cold air and something else. Not perfume, not alcohol, just something else. She wanted to believe it was fatigue, that it was a midlife crisis, that it was anything, but Jessica carefully put the phone back in her jacket pocket. Her hands were still shaking. She finished changing the bed sheets mechanically, on autopilot. Then she went downstairs, took out her phone, and dialed the number she had found on the internet a week ago, but hadn't dared to call. Miller Detective Agency, answered a male voice. Hello? Jessica's voice was surprisingly calm. I would like to hire a private investigator. On Sunday, Chase led the service, but his sermon was about the Garden of Gethsemane, about Jesus' prayer on the night before his crucifixion, about his request to the Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Sometimes, Chase said, his voice breaking, we find ourselves in situations where every choice causes pain, where every decision leads to suffering, and we pray, we ask God to show us the way, but heaven is silent. Jessica sat in the front row, her face impassive. She looked at her husband and saw a stranger. On Monday evening, at 10 o'clock, Matthew sat in his apartment in front of his laptop. The Peoria School District resignation form was open on the screen. The cursor blinked in the reason for resignation field. He typed, personal reasons, moving to another state. His finger hovered over the submit button. Then he picked up his phone and wrote a message. He chose his words carefully, deleted, rewrote. In the end, he left a simple, we need to talk, tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock, it's important. He pressed send and closed his eyes, feeling everything inside him tighten with fear and relief at the same time. The reply came 5 minutes later. I'll be there. Matthew returned to his laptop and pressed submit on the resignation form. That was it. The decision was made. There was no turning back. Tuesday, October 8th. It was a cloudy day, with low gray clouds covering the sky over Peoria, and the air smelled like rain. Matthew couldn't concentrate at school all day. His students noticed his distraction. He mixed up the dates of Civil War battles twice, something that had never happened before. Liz stopped him in the hallway after class. "Tonight?" she asked quietly, putting her hand on his shoulder. Matthew nodded. "Yes, I'll tell him everything. For good." "Are you sure?" "I have to, Liz. Otherwise, I'll just break down. I've already handed in my resignation. Officially. It's real." Liz hugged him. "Be careful. People who are cornered can be dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Matthew smiled weakly. "He's just scared, like me. But I can't let fear control my life anymore." At 7:45 that evening, Matthew was already in apartment number 7. He had come early to gather his thoughts. He paced from corner to corner of the small room, rehearsing the words he was going to say. At 8:03, the agreed-upon knock sounded. 3 short knocks, a pause, 2 long knocks. Chase looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, his face was gaunt, and he clearly hadn't slept well. He came in, took off his coat, but didn't sit down, remaining standing by the door, as if ready to leave at any moment. "What did you want to say?" His voice was even but tense. Matthew took a deep breath. "I submitted my resignation, officially last night. I'm leaving Peoria at the end of December." Chase paled. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely serious. I've already found several openings in Portland and Seattle. I'll be applying this week." Matthew moved closer. "Chase, I can't live like this anymore. I'm 39 years old. I want to wake up in the morning and not be afraid that someone will find out the truth. I want to hold the hand of the person I love on the street. I just want to live." "What about me?" Chase's voice trembled. "What am I supposed to do?" "You can come with me." Matthew took another step closer. "We can start over, somewhere where no one knows us, where we can be ourselves." "I can't just abandon my family." Chase raised his voice. "I have a wife, children, a community. Hundreds of people depend on me. I can't just disappear." "Then step out of the shadows here." Matthew was calm, determined. "Tell Jessica the truth. Tell the community. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, many will turn away. But at least you will be living honestly." Chase laughed, hysterically, without humor. "Live honestly? Do you have any idea what will happen? I'll be kicked out of the church. Jessica will take the kids. My reputation, everything I've worked for in 20 years, will be destroyed. And all for what? For sin? Stop calling it a sin." Matthew raised his voice for the first time. "You love me. I know it. You can't look me in the eye and say that's a lie. I can love you and still recognize it as a sin." Chase turned away. "The temptation may be strong, but that doesn't make it right. God is testing me, and I'm failing that test over and over again." "God isn't testing you." Matthew grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to turn around. "This isn't a test. This is who you are. It's part of you. And the longer you deny it, the more pain you cause yourself and everyone around you." Chase looked him in the eyes, and Matthew saw the struggle there. Desire versus fear, love versus faith, hope versus despair. "I can't," Chase whispered. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I'm not that strong." "Then it's over." Matthew let go of him and stepped back. "Either we come out of the shadows together, here or in another city, or I do it alone. I will no longer be your dirty secret. I will no longer be the person you repent for every Sunday." "Matthew, please." Chase's voice was pleading. "You have a week," Matthew was adamant. 7 days to decide. Either you choose me, truly, openly, or we never see each other again. I'm not going to wait around for years, hoping that one day you'll find the courage. Life is too short." "You're going to ruin my life," Chase said, almost in a whisper, but there was accusation in his words. "No." Matthew shook his head. "I'm trying to save mine. You can join me or not. That's your choice. But I'm making my choice right now. I'm choosing honesty. I'm choosing a life without lies." Chase stood motionless for several long seconds, then turned abruptly, grabbed his coat, and left without another word. The door slammed shut with a hollow sound, so final. Matthew sank down onto the sofa and covered his face with his hands. He didn't cry. There were no tears. There was only an empty, scorched feeling inside, a mixture of relief and grief. On Wednesday morning, Jessica Sanders met with a private investigator in a small cafe on the other side of town, far from the areas where she might be recognized. Thomas Miller was a man of about 55, with graying hair and the tired eyes of a man who had seen too many other people's secrets. He ordered black coffee and took out a notebook. "Tell me about your situation, Mrs. Sanders," he said in a professional, sympathetic tone. Jessica clutched her teacup with both hands. "I think my husband is cheating on me. I found a second phone. Messages from someone named M. He often goes out in the evenings, says he's visiting parishioners, but..." She fell silent. "But you don't believe it," Miller finished. "How long have you suspected?" "Several months, maybe longer. I didn't want to see it, but now I need to know." Miller nodded, taking notes. "I'll start surveillance tonight. It usually takes a few days to establish a pattern of behavior. Do you know when he usually leaves?" "Tuesdays and Fridays, sometimes Wednesdays. He says around 8 or 9 in the evening." "Okay, I'll follow him, take pictures, document all his movements. If he meets with someone, I'll find out who." Jessica nodded, feeling nauseous. "How long will it take?" "Usually a week, maybe 2. I'll send you daily reports to the email address you provided." After the meeting, Jessica sat in her car in the parking lot for a long time, unable to start the engine. Part of her still hoped it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. That Chase really did visit sick parishioners, that the second phone was for church business, that M was just anyone but a mistress, or a lover. The thought flashed so quickly that Jessica almost didn't catch it. But it was there, in the back of her mind, a tiny seed of suspicion that she was afraid to admit. On Thursday evening, the Sanders family had dinner together, which had been a rarity lately. Jessica made chicken and vegetables, Chase's favorite dish. The children talked about school. Emily had gotten the lead role in the school play. Jacob had made the basketball team. Chase sat at the head of the table, smiling, asking questions, praising the children. The perfect father, the perfect husband, the perfect family. Jessica looked at him and saw a stranger. This man she had lived with for 18 years, who was the father of her children, who stood next to her at the altar and swore eternal fidelity. Who was he really? "Dad, are you listening?" Emily's voice brought Jessica back to reality. Chase blinked, waking from his thoughts. "Sorry, sweetie. What did you say?" "I asked if you'd come to the premiere of the play. It's on December 15th. "Of course I'll come." Chase smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Jacob reached for the bread. "Are you coming to my first game, Dad? It's on Saturday." "Of course." They continued to eat and make small talk, and Chase suddenly felt a lump in his throat. He looked at his family, his wife, who was still beautiful at 42, his daughter, so talented and intelligent, his son, strong and kind, and realized he could lose them all. Matthew had asked him to choose, but how could he choose between two parts of himself? Between who he should be and who he really was? After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms, Jessica washed the dishes and Chase dried them. It was an old habit of theirs, dating back to the early years of their marriage, when they were poor students dreaming of the future. "Chase," Jessica said quietly, without looking at him, "if you had a problem, a secret, would you tell me?" His hand with the towel froze. "What do you mean?" "We've been together for so many years. Sometimes I feel like I don't know you anymore. You've become so distant." "I'm just tired of my church duties," Chase said, the familiar phrase. But even to himself it sounded false. Jessica finally looked at him. "Really? Is that all?" He wanted to tell the truth. He wanted to say, "No, it's not just that. I'm living a lie. I'm torn between what I believe and who I am. I love you, but not as I should. I'm sorry." But instead he said, "Yes, really. Everything's fine. Jessica nodded and went back to the dishes, and Chase saw a single tear roll down her cheek before she could wipe it away. On Friday evening, Chase sat in his office at the church. An open Bible lay on the table in front of him, but he wasn't reading. He was just staring at the pages, not seeing the words. He had 3 days left before the week he had given Matthew was up. 3 days to decide. He thought about his calling. At 18, he had felt the Lord's call, clear and irresistible. He had dedicated his life to ministry, studied at seminary, married a good Christian girl, and built a career as a pastor. Everything was right. Everything was according to plan. But when did it start? When did he first feel attracted to men? In seminary? Before that? He had always considered it a temptation to be suppressed, a prayer to be overcome. And then he met Matthew. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. Chase closed the Bible and rested his head in his hands. "Lord," he whispered into the emptiness of his office, "show me the way. Give me a sign. What should I do?" But heaven, as always, remained silent. Friday, October 15th. The week Matthew had been given was coming to an end today. He had been at work all day, teaching his last classes before the fall break. The students were excited, looking forward to a week of rest, but Matthew could hardly concentrate. In the evening, around 6 o'clock, he returned home. His apartment on Main Street was quiet and empty. He took off his jacket, hung it on a hook by the door, and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. The bedroom door was ajar. Matthew froze. He remembered clearly that he had closed it that morning. His heart began to beat faster. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe he had forgotten. "Matthew," a voice from the bedroom made him start. He turned slowly. A familiar figure stood in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes red, as if from crying or insomnia. "How did you get in?" Matthew asked quietly. "I have a spare key. You gave it to me a year ago, remember?" Matthew remembered. It was during a time when they still believed their relationship could be something more than secret meetings. "What do you want?" "To talk. Please. Just talk." Matthew walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa. His guest followed him and sat down opposite him on the edge of the chair, his hands clenched into fists. "The week is up," Matthew said. "Have you made your decision?" "I can't lose you." His voice trembled. "I need you. I've tried to pray, tried to find an answer, but I can't imagine life without you." "Then choose me." Matthew leaned forward. "For real, not in secret, not in the shadows. Choose me. Give me a little more time, please. Another month or two. I'll find a way. I'll talk to Jessica. Explain." "No." Matthew shook his head. "There's no more time. No more delays. I've already submitted my resignation. It was approved today, officially. I'm leaving at the end of December." The face opposite him contorted with pain. "You really did it." "Yes. And I offered you to come with me. I offered you a new life. But you're not ready. Maybe you'll never be ready." "Matthew, please." "I'm sorry." Matthew stood up. "But my decision is final. I'm going to live honestly, with or without you. And I think we shouldn't see each other anymore. It's too painful, for both of us." "No!" The voice became sharp, desperate. "You can't just leave. You can't just end it." "I can, and I am." Matthew turned toward the door. "Please leave. We have nothing left to talk about." What happened next happened so quickly. Someone's hands grabbed his shoulders and turned him back around. Matthew saw a face contorted with rage and despair. Then those hands were around his throat. "You can't leave." The voice was strange, unfamiliar. "You'll destroy everything. Everything I've built. I won't let you." Matthew tried to pull the hands away from his throat, scratching at them, but the grip was iron. He tried to speak, but couldn't make a sound. Air wasn't getting into his lungs. His gaze met that of his attacker, and he saw not rage, but horror. horror at the realization of what he was doing. But the hands did not loosen. The room began to darken at the edges. Matthew fell to his knees, pulling his attacker down with him. His fingers weakened, scratching in a last attempt to free himself. The last thing he saw before the darkness was a familiar face, etched with such horror that it seemed as if it was not his soul leaving his body, but the soul of the man who was killing him. Silence. Chase Sanders knelt beside Matthew Coleman's motionless body. His arms were still outstretched, his fingers trembling. He looked at what he had done and couldn't believe it. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, God, what have I done?" He touched Matthew's neck, trying to find a pulse. Nothing. Matthew's eyes were open, staring into space. Chase recoiled, feeling his stomach clench. He vomited right there on the living room floor. How long did he sit there, unable to move, unable to think? Minutes? Hours? Then his survival instinct kicked in. He had to do something. He couldn't just walk away. Too much evidence. His DNA under Matthew's fingernails, where he had scratched his hands. Maybe hair, fingerprints, a robbery. It had to look like a robbery. Chase forced himself to stand up. His hands were still shaking as he pulled the sleeves of his coat over his hands, using the fabric as gloves. He opened the drawers in the living room and emptied their contents onto the floor. He knocked over a chair. He grabbed Matthew's laptop from the table and his tablet from the kitchen counter. He found a wallet in the jacket hanging by the door and took out the cash, $120. He moved mechanically, not allowing himself to look at the body. If he looked, if he allowed himself to realize that Matthew was dead, that he had killed him, he would break down. His last action was to break the bedroom window from the inside, using a pillow to muffle the sound, a staged break-in. Then he left through the front door, locking it behind him with the same spare key he had used to enter. He threw the key into a storm drain 2 blocks away. He left the laptop and tablet in a dumpster behind a Chinese restaurant. He burned the cash in the church furnace an hour later. When he returned home at 11 o'clock that night, Jessica was already asleep. He took a long, hot shower, trying to wash away not only the physical traces, but also the feeling of Matthew's hands scratching his skin in a last attempt to survive. Saturday morning was clear and cold. Elizabeth Chen parked near Matthew's house at 9:30. They had agreed to meet to return the books she had borrowed the week before. She also wanted to check how he was feeling after the important meeting he had mentioned. She rang the doorbell. No one answered. She rang again. Silence. Liz took out her phone and dialed Matthew's number. She could hear the phone ringing inside the apartment. He was home. "Matthew?" she called out. "It's Liz. Please open the door." Nothing. A bad feeling crept into her soul. She tried the door handle. It was locked. She walked around the house and looked in the windows. The bedroom window was broken. Liz returned to the front door and dialed 911. Detective Robert Campbell arrived on the scene 20 minutes after the call. He was 51 years old, and in his 28 years with the Peoria Police Department, he had seen a lot, but murders were rare in this quiet town. Patrol officers had already broken down the door and cordoned off the area. The young woman who had called the police was sitting in the patrol car, pale and shaking. Campbell entered the apartment. The body lay in the living room, between the sofa and the coffee table. A man of about 35 to 40, with obvious signs of strangulation, marks on his neck, burst blood vessels in his eyes. The room looked ransacked. Drawers open, things scattered, a chair overturned. The bedroom window was broken. "Looks like a robbery," said young Officer Jenkins. Campbell slowly surveyed the scene. Something was wrong. The mess looked too neat, too staged. The drawers were open, but the belongings were not scattered chaotically. The TV was in place. The expensive watches on the shelf were untouched. "Question the neighbors," he said. "Find out if anyone heard or saw anything strange last night." Forensic investigators were already at work, taking photographs and collecting evidence. Campbell went out to talk to the woman who found the body. Elizabeth Chen looked shocked, but held her composure. She recounted how they had agreed to meet, how no one answered the door, how she saw the broken window. "Did you know Mr. Coleman well?" Campbell asked, writing in his notebook. "We worked together at Peoria High School. He taught history, I taught English. We were friends." "When was the last time you saw him?" "Yesterday at school, after class, around 4. He seemed tense." "Tense how?" Liz hesitated. "Detective, Matthew hadn't been himself for the last few weeks. Agitated, distant. I knew he was having personal problems." "What kind of problems?" "He was in a relationship with someone influential. He didn't name names, but he said the person was married, that their relationship had to remain secret." Campbell looked up from his notebook. "Married? Man or woman?" Liz met his gaze directly. "Man. Matthew was gay, detective, and so was his partner, although he didn't admit it publicly. That changed everything. This wasn't just a robbery. It was passion, secrets, motive." "Do you know who this person is?" "No. Matthew never said, only that he was influential, religious, with a family, that he was afraid of being exposed." Campbell returned to the apartment. The forensic scientist showed him the findings. There was tissue under the victim's fingernails, obviously from the attacker's hands. DNA could be extracted. There were finger marks on the neck. They could try to determine the size of the hand. "Anything else?" Campbell asked. "The victim's phone." The forensic scientist handed him a clear bag with the evidence. "Found it under the couch, but it's not his main phone." Campbell took the bag. It was a cheap, prepaid model. "A second phone, for secret communications." "Looks like it. Lots of deleted messages, but the techs say they can recover them." "Make that a priority." Sunday morning. First Baptist Church of Peoria was full, as usual. But the atmosphere was different. News of Matthew Coleman's murder had already spread throughout the city. People whispered and exchanged glances. Chase Sanders walked up to the pulpit. He hadn't slept all night, and it showed. His face was gray, dark circles under his eyes. His hands trembled as he opened the Bible. "Brothers and sisters," his voice was hoarse. "Before we begin the service, I want to ask you to pray for the soul of Matthew Coleman, a teacher from our community who was murdered on Friday night. This is a tragedy that has shaken us all. Let us bow our heads." The prayer was short and broken. Chase paused several times, as if he couldn't find the words. Jessica sat in the front row and looked at her husband. Something was wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something about his behavior was unsettling. After the service at home, when the children had gone to their rooms, she saw it. Chase was taking off his shirt, getting ready to take a shower. On his neck, just above the collar, were scratches. Several parallel lines, already healing but still visible. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to them. Chase froze. "What?" "On your neck, the scratches." His hand instinctively reached for his neck. "Oh, I scratched myself in my sleep. My nails are too long." A lie. Jessica knew a lie when she heard one. The scratches were too deep, too neat. They weren't marks from his own fingernails. They were marks from someone else's fingers, scratching in desperation. Monday, October 17th. Detective Campbell sat in his office at the Peoria Police Department, looking at printouts of recovered messages from Matthew Coleman's phone. The tech department had worked all night Sunday. Most of the messages had been deleted, but the experts had managed to recover about 40% of the correspondence from the last 3 months. What they found was enough. The messages came from a contact saved as M, the same pseudonym Jessica Sanders had mentioned when she hired the private investigator. Campbell read slowly, taking notes. "Can't today. Jessica will be home. I miss you. This isn't right. We shouldn't. But I'm coming anyway. 8 o'clock? You can't just walk away. Think about what you're doing. Give me time. Please." The last message was sent at 7:32 p.m. on Friday, October 15th, 28 minutes before the estimated time of death. "I'm at your house. We need to talk. Let me in." Campbell leaned back in his chair. M was at Matthew's house on the night of the murder. M had access to the apartment. M was the last person to see the victim alive. He called the tech department. "Can you track the location of the victim's second phone? Where has it been for the last 2 weeks?" "We're already working on it, Detective. We'll give you a report in an hour." The report came in 53 minutes later. Campbell studied the map on the computer screen. Red dots showed the location of Matthew Coleman's phone for the last 14 days. The house on Main Street, logical, he lived there. Peoria High School, his place of work. The grocery store, the cafe, the library, the usual places. And one apartment on the outskirts of town, on Western Avenue. The phone had been there 8 times in 2 weeks, each time in the evening, each time staying for 2 to 3 hours. "Check who rents this apartment," Campbell told Officer Jenkins. 20 minutes later, the answer came. "Apartment number 7. The tenant is James Richardson. The contract was signed 2 years ago. Payment is in cash." "Does James Richardson exist?" "No, sir. It's a fictitious name. We checked the databases. There is no one with that name and date of birth listed in the contract." A secret apartment. A meeting place. Campbell requested another check. "Track all the phones that were in that apartment at the same times as the victim's phone." This took longer. Telecom operators were reluctant to share data. Court orders were required. But by Monday evening, Campbell had a list. One number appeared again and again. A prepaid card registered to a fictitious name, but technically traceable. "Follow this number. Where was it on Friday night, October 15th, between 7 and 10 p.m.? The result came in on Tuesday morning. The phone was near Matthew Coleman's house from 7:15 to 8:30 p.m. Then it moved to the church on Adams Street, then to a residence on Oak Street. Campbell checked the address on Oak Street, Reverend Chase Sanders's house. On Tuesday afternoon, Campbell returned to his conversation with Elizabeth Chen. He asked her to come to the station for additional questions. Liz sat in the interrogation room, a cup of water in front of her. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying. "Miss Chen," Campbell began gently, "you said that Mr. Coleman's partner was an influential, married religious man. Can you tell me more about that?" "Matthew never mentioned a name." Liz clenched her hands into fists. "He was very careful, but he said this man held an important position in society, that he had a family, a reputation, that he was afraid of being exposed. Did he say what this man did?" Liz thought for a moment. "Not directly. But once, Matthew mentioned that they had argued about a sermon. He said, 'He stood there and talked about sin, and then he came to me and apologized.' I asked what that meant, but Matthew fell silent, saying he had said too much." "A sermon," Campbell repeated. "So this man is a priest?" Liz looked at him with wide eyes. "I didn't know for sure, but now that you say that, yes, it makes sense." Campbell asked for a list of all the priests and pastors in Peoria. There were 17. He began checking each one's alibi for the evening of Friday, October 15th. Most were at home with their families or at church events, all except one. Chase Sanders claimed he was home all evening. His wife confirmed this in the initial interview. But when Campbell requested the CCTV footage from the streets near Matthew's house, he found what he was looking for. At 7:12 p.m., a dark blue sedan, matching Chase Sanders' make and model, drove down Main Street. At 7:17 p.m., the same car parked a block away from the victim's house. At 8:36 p.m., the car left the area. Campbell requested clearer footage. The license plate was partially visible. Technicians enhanced the image. The plate belonged to Chase Sanders. On Wednesday morning, Campbell drove to the Sanders house. Jessica opened the door, her face tense. "Detective Campbell," she said quietly. "I remember you. You're a member of our church." "Yes, ma'am. I need to ask you some questions about Friday, October 15th. They sat down in the living room. Jessica folded her hands in her lap, her fingers clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "You said your husband was home all evening," Campbell said. "Is that true?" A long pause. Then Jessica looked up at him. "No," she whispered. "That's not true. Tell me what really happened." That night, Chase left around 7 o'clock. He said he had to visit a dying parishioner in the hospital. "I didn't think anything of it. It's normal for a pastor." Her voice trembled. But he didn't come back until around 11. I asked how it went. He said everything was fine, that the man had died peacefully. "Did you check?" Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. The next day, I called the hospital. None of our parishioners had died that night. No one was in intensive care. "Why didn't you tell me the truth right away?" "Because I hoped I was wrong, that he had another reason. But then I saw the scratches on his neck, and I remembered the second phone, and..." She couldn't continue, sobs shaking her body. On Wednesday evening, the DNA test results came back. The tissue found under Matthew Coleman's fingernails matched a sample taken from the blood donor database. Chase Sanders. A perfect match. Campbell had everything: motive, opportunity, physical evidence, witness testimony, camera footage, cell phone location data, a false alibi. He got an arrest warrant. Sunday, October 23rd. The morning service at First Baptist Church in Peoria was coming to an end. Chase Sanders finished his sermon about forgiveness, about God's mercy, about second chances for sinners. The congregation was singing the final hymn when the back doors of the church opened. Detective Campbell entered, followed by 2 uniformed officers. The singing stopped. All heads turned. Campbell walked slowly down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He stopped in front of the pulpit. "Reverend Chase Sanders." His voice was formal, but not without sympathy. "You are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Matthew Coleman. You have the right to remain silent." Chase didn't move while Campbell read his rights. His face was pale but calm, almost relieved. "I understand," he said quietly when Campbell finished. He looked at his congregation, the people he had shepherded for 8 years, at Jessica in the front row, at their children beside her. Emily was crying. Jacob looked confused. "I'm sorry," Chase whispered, not clear to whom he was addressing. His family, his congregation, God, Matthew. The officers handcuffed him. All the way to the exit, the congregation remained silent, watching as their pastor, their spiritual leader, their model of righteousness, was led away in handcuffs. At the police station, in the interrogation room, Chase sat across from Campbell. His lawyer was on his way, but Chase said he wanted to talk now. "I did it," he said simply. "I killed Matthew." "Tell me what happened." Campbell turned on the tape recorder, and Chase told him everything about the meeting 2 years ago, about the secret meetings in the rented apartment, about the struggle between faith and desire, about Matthew's ultimatum, about that last meeting. "I didn't want to kill him." Chase's voice was even, almost monotonous. "I just wanted him to stop talking about leaving. I put my hands on his shoulders, trying to hold him back, to make him listen, but he tried to push me away, and I don't know what happened. My hands just clamped down on his throat. I saw the terror in his eyes, but I couldn't stop." "Why did you stage the robbery?" "Self-preservation, fear. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just acted." "Do you regret it?" Chase finally looked up. There was bottomless pain in his eyes. "Every second of every day. I took the life of a man I loved, a man who just wanted to live honestly, and I did it because I was too cowardly to do the same." The trial began in January 2025. It lasted 3 weeks. Chase's lawyer tried to prove that it was an unintentional killing committed in the heat of the moment, but the evidence was irrefutable, and the staged robbery suggested a deliberate attempt to cover up the crime. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge handed down the sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Chase accepted the sentence without emotion. As he was led out of the courtroom, he looked at Jessica one last time. She turned away. 8 months have passed. Jessica Sanders moved with her children to Chicago to live with her sister. The divorce was quick and quiet. Emily went to therapy to try to cope with the trauma. Jacob withdrew into himself and refused to talk about his father. Jessica no longer attended church. She couldn't. Every time she saw the pulpit, heard a sermon, she remembered the man who stood there and spoke of truth while living a lie. Elizabeth Chen resigned from Peoria High School at the end of the year. She moved to Portland, one of the cities Matthew had planned to move to. She taught English at a small private school and lit a candle in his memory every October 15th. Detective Robert Campbell submitted his retirement papers in the spring. 28 years of service, hundreds of cases solved, but this murder haunted him. He, too, had stopped going to church. His faith had been undermined, not in God, but in the people who spoke in his name. Chase Sanders sat in a cell in a maximum security prison in Illinois. He no longer preached, although the prison chaplain had offered him the opportunity to join the services. He read the Bible every day. He prayed every night. Not for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it. He prayed for Matthew, for his soul, for the peace that Chase had taken from him. In the Peoria Police Department archives, case number 247831 was closed. The murder had been solved, the perpetrator convicted, justice served. But for those affected by this tragedy, the case would never be closed. The wounds would remain, the questions unanswered, lives destroyed by a single moment of despair and rage. The story of Chase Sanders and Matthew Coleman will serve as a warning to others about the price of lies, about the destructive power of fear, about what happens when people are forced to hide their true nature. Matthew wanted to live honestly. He died for that desire. Chase couldn't live honestly, and that doomed them both.